season of the Breech Birth podcast will be a little different. I'll be speaking with researchers, midwives, and obstetricians working within the breech birth space, bringing additional perspectives, knowledge, and evidence-based research to you, the listener. I hope you enjoy these conversations. Welcome, Dr. Andrew Bisits.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for joining me. So, before we jump into your questions, could you please share a little bit about your background, the experience you have with Breech and twins as well?
All right. So, I graduated in 1979. I did a short stint at the Royal Hospital for Women as a student and was pretty young, and there were a few interesting observations about birth and everything. I then did some time preparing to be a GP where I saw births in various interesting settings. And then I did a stint at the previous King George V Hospital, which is now RPA Mothers and Babies, and really didn't like it. As in, I didn't like the environment of practice there. Clearly, I learned a few things. Now, after that, I spent a year in India, at the northwestern highlands of India, in the Tibetan part of India. I worked with Tibetan refugees, and I found that I was pretty deficient in all aspects, particularly childbirth obstetrics. So when I came back, I decided I would get more experience, and then I just stayed there. I stayed in the specialty because I enjoyed it, and I particularly liked working with midwives and the women, and clearly I found that there was a particular energy in that. Ever since then, 1984, I've been constantly working in the obstetrics, childbirth space. And that was at two regional hospitals then in Sydney, Liverpool and Fairfield. That was a very excellent experience, great insights and great people. Then I moved to Newcastle for 23 years. Newcastle at that time was a very progressive place regarding obstetrics and childbirth. Was the first institution, I think, in Australia that they labelled them independent midwives, and so and they were really amazing people who took on those jobs, and I learned a lot from them. But I learned a lot from a lot of people, and there was constant discussion about birth. I don't think it was as restrictive as perhaps the capital cities would have been, and that was a very good thing I found for me, and I think for women in practice in general. So I stayed there 23 years, and then I moved to Sydney because of various family issues, career change, challenge, etc. at the Royal Hospital for Women. I was there for 15 years. Now, in both places, I did a lot of work, particularly in relation to offering the option of, a vaginal birth in trickier situations, one of those being a breech. But it was also a lot of time setting up systems regarding continuity of midwifery care. So now I finished up last year, as in I resigned from my position, but I'm still involved in teaching. Main thing is that currently I'm not getting up in the middle of the night to work with birthing women, help out there. So that's really my background. Could be many other things, but that's just a brief sketch.
That's in a nutshell. All right. So off the top of your head, over the years of experience, how many breech singleton births do you believe you've attended?
As far as planned breech births, probably where they might have ended up in a caesarean or a vaginal birth, have to be about 600 or 700. As the actual vaginal breech births, it's probably more like, I don't know, probably 400 or 500.
Yeah, right. Still a significant amount.
Yes, significant amount, yeah.
And I know you support twins as well. Have you done many triplets?
I've done 2 sets of triplets.
And how many twins?
Oh, look, a lot of twins. How many would I say? Look, probably 300 sets of twins.
Yeah. And they vaginal or just overall?
Look, these are rubbery figures, but I'd say probably 250 vaginal.
Awesome. What is the most A common breech presentation that you have witnessed in your practice.
So it's the frank breech presentation where the backside's down and the legs are up.
And what is the most unusual situation that you have witnessed at a breech birth?
Most unusual. Look, there's a few tricky situations. It's mainly where unexpected breech births and the women have totally freaked out because it's unexpected as surprise. And I can remember on one occasion, it was such a shock to the woman that she just stopped pushing and the body had birthed, but then she was so anxious and there was so much anxiety in the room that she just stopped pushing and the baby got a bit caught. Eventually the baby came out, the baby was fine, but it just struck me, the birth space, particularly at the time of a woman pushing a baby out, is a very important factor in how a birth goes. Now, I'm saying the bleeding obvious there, but even just a bit of anxiety at that time, and it can really get in the way of birth going okay. So it's always, with midwives, we've always part of this caring for breeches. The birth space has to be protected and has to be very quiet and calm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there have been a few occasions mechanically where babies have got themselves into slightly funny positions, and then previously we didn't have a lot of good thinking and practices developed over particularly the last 15 years around appropriate manoeuvres into a difficult situation. There have been a few times where I think I've perhaps not done the best thing at the time. The baby's come out, but I think with all this learning, I look back now and I think, I could have done that better, right? And that's been happening all the time.
It's always easy in reflection as well, how you can do it better.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what's always been fantastic.
Yeah. Have you ever had a kneeling breech?
A kneeling breech? Look, I think once or twice, but it's been so fast that, it was a non-issue. I think there have been a few times where we've felt a kneeling breech. We didn't feel happy about the position or safe, and we've advised a caesarean. But not often, I must admit, not often.
Yeah, no, it's rare. Having the numbers that you've got, I'm always curious, the experiences of what you have seen and presented.
Yeah.
So our next question I've got is from one of our listeners. How would you navigate cord prolapse during a pushing phase of a breech baby?
Well, it depends on where the baby is, how the baby is. But generally, in a breech situation, cord prolapse is not always going to be associated with a drop in the baby's heart rate. And particularly if the baby's heart rate's normal, you get the woman to push, get her into the right position. Now, say if the baby's heart rate had dropped and the baby was low enough, I think cautiously you could do a combination of bundle pressure with the woman vertical and then carefully directed groin traction. Now, in other situations, if the baby's, not low and perhaps the feet are well and truly coming down, you might suspect that there's still a bit of a cervix there. You'd best do a caesarean section. It's a tricky call, but in a lot of cases you can help bring about a vaginal birth.
Great. Another question from a listener. When are manoeuvres required during a breech birth?
Well, I'll tell from my experience, the way we set things up, we didn't have to do many manoeuvres, right? Particularly some of the trickier ones. But when are they required? Well, it's when there's a delay. It's not often that you need manoeuvres prior to the legs birthing, because the overwhelming majority of the time, the lower part of the body and the legs birth spontaneously. And it's after that there can be a delay in the birth of the body due to the arms being in the wrong place. So roughly we're talking about, if you're not seeing descent of the body, say once the legs and the backside are out over a 4-minute period, and particularly if the body hasn't turned so the back's uppermost, you should be starting to think that the arms are in the wrong place, and you should examine with permission and appropriately to find out where the arms are so that you can maneuver them out. Now, most of the time, the maneuvers are not much. They're what I call a few flicks of the wrist. So that's one clear indication. Now, the other indication is where the head is not birthing, and most of the time that's due to the head not being flexed. But particularly if a head's not birthing within 1 minute of the rest of the body having birthed, then you have to start thinking about these things, doing a few basic things like the chest press, changing positions, and then it might be things that are a little bit more invasive, right? But I can tell you the most that I've done in general, and this would be in about 20% of births. Most births, particularly with the upright position, they're spontaneous births. But most often, in those 20%, you would just have to sweep the arms out, which is not much because usually you just have to sweep one arm out. And then the other things that you might have to do on occasion are just to help flex the head out. But see, as time has gone on, I really have done less and less. To the extent that I think, well, what am I doing here? And in fact, if I had to answer what am I doing there, I'm mainly looking at things and reassuring myself and others that everything's going well so that we don't have to do much, or that, most of the time, or a lot of the times, just by changing a woman's position and, just things like a chest press, you can deal with most situations.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Next question from a listener. It's a interesting question. I have asked this to someone else as well. This was told by a listener from a doctor. I have my thoughts about this, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Is it true that breech babies don't fill up the uterus and therefore there is no lower segment?
It's not true.
Thank you.
It's not true, and I don't say that in any disparaging but I've done so many cesareans for breeches. Maybe on one or two occasions there's been a poorly formed lower segment, but a woman who is labouring with a breech presentation develops in the overwhelming majority of cases a lower segment, like a woman birthing with a cephalic baby.
Just while we're on that topic, is that something that was maybe thought of in the past around the lower segment? Because my understanding is from the person that had shared that they were told that quite a while ago, and I'm wondering if that was just a theory that was floating around or something.
I'm just thinking back to all the traditional textbooks, and I cannot recall that being emphasised anywhere.
My first impression was it's just a fear-based statement to...
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, don't do a vaginal birth because you don't have this part of your uterus.
Yeah.
Another question from a listener. Can you explain what it means if a breech baby is stargazing in utero and why this would be concerning?
Well, the first thing, if it's stargazing and remaining in that position, there's two concerns. One is there some anatomic abnormality that's stopping the baby from flexing the head, or is there some neurological problem whereby the baby's just keeping the head in that position? Now, both of those are fairly significant. They are causes for concern. It shouldn't stop you from perhaps trying to turn a baby. But if a baby's head was persistently extended and literally stargazing, it's one of those situations where I would advise against a vaginal breech birth. Now, having said that, what we see through an ultrasound, and it's not always perfect. And I remember on one occasion where a baby was very much stargazing and looking up, and we thought, look, this is not right. We advise a cesarean. But at the time of cesarean, it was very clear that the baby's head was capable of flexing.
Mm-hmm.
So that mystified me a bit, but clearly there have been other occasions where babies have very clearly wanted to keep their heads in that extended position. And, what you're trying to prevent there is, I think those babies would probably have a higher propensity for rotating into a posterior position and getting the chin caught on the symphysis pubis.
Yeah. Interesting. Have you had many posterior presentations for breech?
No.
Not one?
Really, Not one, no. Again, a few babies have maybe shown a tendency to rotate that way, but nothing convincing. I mean, look, and I've heard of it happening, and it's one of the things that in our breech courses we teach, that if I think it could happen, particularly a woman who's birthed before and she births very rapidly, so the baby doesn't do those clever twists and turns and just slips out virtually as a posterior, then the chick gets caught. But apart from that, no.
Okay. And it just made me think of another question. Have you worked much with women with bicornuate uterus and having breech babies?
Yes. Look, it's not much different, just apply virtually the same rules. They can push out a baby, all right? They can push out a breech baby, and suppose you might watch them a little bit more closely, but there's no reason that baby's head should get caught in some position, particularly if they're contracting while if you're seeing progress of labour. Again, it's not a huge number. Sometimes when women find out that their baby's breech, they've got a bicornuate uterus, they get a bit concerned. They will request a cesarean section, but other women very clearly just want to have a go, and I can't see any problem with that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Our next question from a listener. Are you still likely to progress if baby's foot is presenting in front of their bottom?
It depends on how far the bottom's away, I think. So again, the majority of these situations, the foot might be below the backside, but the backside's not too far away. So technically, it's still a complete breech. And the other sign is that if the knee's flexed, well, that's really a complete breech. Right? These terms are imprecise, right? But currently, practitioners, well, I suppose particularly obstetricians, gravitate too easily to the footling breech because in a lot of instances that's an indication for a caesarean section because of the concerns about cord prolapse. But there's a very good review on this in one of the chapters in Breech Without Borders, and it's very intelligently displayed how much variation there is in the understanding of what is a footling, right? And then some of the data around that. So I think particularly as, some places are now more prepared to offer a vaginal breech, I think it's important that they be very clear that the position of the foot shouldn't be considered in isolation. It's really in relation to whether or not the knee's flexed and how far away is the backside.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to have an Australian doctor talk about the presentation in correct terms because, there is a lot of mislabeling of footling.
Yeah, there
I've talked
is.
about that with a couple of other guests just around if it's a true footling, they've got extended hips and extended knees, and you can't have that with a term baby. So a well-termed baby is going to be complete or incomplete or frame. Or kneeling. You have some weird stuff, but that's rare. Less likely to see that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Why do you think breech vaginal birth is feared or avoided by obstetricians?
I think there's some very clear reasons for that. Up till the famous trial, the trial that was reported in 2000, there was already an increasing concern about breaches and complications. A lot of that was fueled by the increasing medico-legal concerns at the time. All of that sort of medico-legal stuff, anxiety, started in earnest, I can tell you, in 1984. And from then on, it just increased. And, over intermittently, there were newspaper reports of these massive payouts for babies that were injured during births, and they were massive.
Yeah.
So that really caused a lot of anxiety and fear. And then in that fearful environment, that's where the term breech trial landed. Because that reported that 1 in 20 babies where the mother planned a vaginal breech had a severe neonatal outcome, not just some neonatal complication, but it was labelled as significant severe, then that was viewed as a license to say this is no go because it's just too threatening. That was very pronounced at the time because I lived through it. And, I remember all the pressure that, because we kept offering vaginal breaches, and I remember people thinking, is the clinical governance committee going to stop us from doing vaginal breaches? There was that sort of discussion. But it also gave license to a particular mindset, in particular institutions that were concerned that women weren't allowed to birth the baby vaginally is a breech. And all of that was accepted because that's how scared people were. And it's not only individual obstetricians, it was institutions, it was insurers, right? So there was a massive blanket of fear, and it was very difficult. Yeah, it was very challenging working in that environment and very challenging to try and lift it a bit.
Yeah. From your perspective, why is it still sort of avoided and at this point?
Still the impact of that. And see, what's happened now is that you've then got this whole de-skilling phenomenon. So the apprehension around a breech will firstly stem from the risks and, those factors that I mentioned. But then practitioners will say, well, I haven't seen a breech for 10 or 15 years. Therefore, the risks will be even worse, and has been a de-skilling because a lot of it is also to do with losing a sense about what a normal birth is, right?
Yeah.
And particularly, you didn't even want to go to the breech space. So that's unfortunately still around, but I think there are a few perhaps glimmering possibilities.
That's perfect. Thank you. Could you please share more on the value of breech vaginal birth and the evidence, particularly the risk with vaginal breech versus vaginal head versus breech C-section?
Well, the value of vaginal breech, first of all, is that there's a very reasonable number of women who want to birth their babies vaginally, right? Because intrinsically they feel that's good for them and it's good for their baby, right? I'm not sure how you can dispute that. So the value, and look, the value that I see is that, I suppose the best evidence for that value is that I've always spoken, so if we've advised a caesarean and done a caesarean in the course of attempting a vaginal breech, clearly I've always gone up to the women after and said, look, how is it? Things like that. Now, what strikes me is that none of these women have been really disappointed. There might have been some sadness at, say, not achieving the vaginal birth, and one of my midwife colleagues does describe that at times there is an element of grief, but they're never disappointed for having tried. Now, that tells me that there is just something too special about birth for it just to be dismissed, and that's the value. I mean, I'm sure there are better words, but there's something special about birthing a baby vaginal, and it's partly to do with that oxytocic effect around relatedness to the baby, feeling connected, and of course it's overwhelming. For me, it's overwhelming at the time of the birth, how this value. All right, so when you're comparing, there's two things to look at. Can we measure this purported value that I'm talking about in a vaginal birth and a planned caesarean birth? It's hard to measure, right? They are totally different experiences. They are totally different, and there is something very special happening in a vaginal birth that just doesn't happen in a caesarean. I'm not saying that women aren't pleased, but there's something so different. So now the measurements or the evidence around that hasn't been collected in any, say, systematic, convincing way, but I'm just speaking from my experience. But as far as the risks go, well, where you're paying attention to certain guidelines, procedures, etc., you're keeping an eye on things in a sensible way, the chance of anything going wrong with the vaginal breech is low. We've sort of agreed on a number that 1 in 500 babies might die. If you look at the same outcome for head-first cephalic births, an average number that's thrown around is 1 in 1,000. For planned elective caesarean sections, it's 1 in 2,000, 2,500. Some people say 1 in 3,000. As far as, say, things not perinatal mortality or death, but more significant, noticeable short-term complication, it's probably about 3 in 100 breaches, 2 in 100 head-first births, and maybe 1 to 2 per 100 in a caesarean. Longer term, it's quite clear that there's not much difference for a baby between a planned elective caesarean section and a planned vaginal birth. If anything, there's increasing concern about the disadvantage of a planned elective caesarean section regarding chronic diseases, diabetes, obesity. Still a lot of dispute around that data, but there's enough of it around that you can't ignore it. even if there are contradictory findings. There's enough of it around. And if anything, the longer term for the vaginal breaches, the original follow-up from the term breach study showed some advantage for them. So I think we can fairly confidently say that there's no obvious difference longer term. For mothers, it seems that there is, if we look at risks, there's not much difference between a planned vaginal birth and a planned caesarean. There are impacts of a planned caesarean for future childbearing. There's no question about it. Particularly in our country, the majority of women end up having another caesarean. Then if they end up trying a vaginal birth, well, the concerns about scar rupture. Having a planned caesarean for a breech, the implication is a future vaginal birth will, in bland terms, be a high-risk vaginal birth. Yes, you can have another caesarean. That's, has got its own problems. There are increasing concerns about some of the downstream effect of caesareans for women's health as well. So I think whatever we do, really, if we're paying attention to important aspects or details about an individual in our care, then the risks are low, whatever you do. It's the question is that, all right, in some it's lower, all right. In some women will view that immediately, well, the risks are higher, therefore, say in a vaginal breach, therefore it's relatively unsafe. But that's an individual decision.
Absolutely.
It's very much important, say a big part of the breech course that we do, or a substantial component of it is the evidence and how we communicate that evidence. And so we had a very good course yesterday in Sydney, and there was fantastic discussion about well, what do you say? How do you say it? And the other issue was, can you really be informed about some of these nasty complications? As in, yes, you can acknowledge the numbers, but there's an aspect that everyone agreed that you only really know about it if it happens to you. Now, anyway, that's a complex area in its own right, but I think that's a very important area.
Yeah. I think you've made a good point. There's all this research and information. At the end of the day, it comes back to the individual woman to weigh up the risks and benefits in her own perspective and perception, and she ultimately needs to make that decision for herself.
Yeah.
Can you speak to us about the coercion that is happening when it comes to birthing breech babies and the paradoxes in care?
Well, there's no doubt about the coercion. It's a sensitive topic because if you raise this with institutions or individuals, clearly they can get quite defensive. So I want to make the point that coercion does happen, but it's not because people are being nasty. It's really that they are genuinely concerned. They are fearful. So you still get some very large institutions who have all the, backup facilities for supporting a woman, but they will say, virtually you can't do that here. Or, excuses are invented, not invented, sort of uncovered, that in your situation, you really shouldn't do this, right? So it ranges from saying that, well, you're not allowed to do it, then it might be, well, we don't have the facilities to support it. And now I think that's a fairly legitimate one for some smaller hospitals. Other places will say, look, we haven't seen a breech birth for so many years, right? So there is coercion going on, and it's got a whole lot of, how should I say, reasons and justification for it. But in any case, and there are some crass examples of it, very crass examples, and that's still the case. As I said, there are numerous justifications for it. In the cold light of day, each of those justifications really can be countered in a polite and constructive way.
Mm-hmm.
And so now the paradoxes are, the key paradox for me is particularly larger institutions who can do very tricky operations and have fantastic facilities, cannot get their head around the possibility of a woman simply pushing out her breech baby.
Yeah.
That's a paradox to me. And even if I said that, to some people, and some people who might be listening from those institutions might get a bit upset and say, well, yeah, we do it for this reason. But you do have to take a step back, and say, if we can say do various tricky transplants, or we can do, various tricky operations. This is not an operation. This is a normal process.
That's been happening for our entire lifetime.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, the other paradox is that, all right, there is this constant concern about de-skilling. Well, if you de-skill, what you do is you upskill. And there are excellent opportunities for upskilling, yes. You mightn't get your hands on a birth, but you sure can rehearse it very effectively with the help of videos, models, and, our whole simulation possibilities. So it's a pity that sometimes when the topic of breech comes up in these situations, it's very much in the emergency arena. Now, that is almost an excuse, another excuse for, well, it's an emergency, therefore you've got to try and avoid the emergency, and you simply do a cesarean. But, that doesn't quite add up.
And that's it, like those surprise breaches for midwives at home. There is no option. The baby's coming out. They need to know what to do. And just like a short little 45 minutes in a day looking at breech once every 2 years is not good enough. It needs to be more.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, but the other paradox is that breaches are still going to happen. It doesn't matter how many scans we do. And clearly, if we do have those unusual occasions, well, just like, difficulties with shoulders or other difficulties, you have to be prepared for it. And yes, sure, women are having fewer babies, and so, the collective experience around these is less, but we've got suitable surrogate opportunities to keep our skills going so that we can handle it at the time. As I keep saying, this is not rocket science, right? And it's mostly, not losing a sense of what a normal birth is about. That's a lot of it is about that. And then a lot of it is about, particularly for obstetricians, but a lot of midwives, it's really just keeping up with a lot of the recent very intelligent thinking about the mechanics of a breech birth and how you can best work with that so that you can effect a safe birth.
I think once you understand the mechanics of what actually is going on with a breech and how the arms can get caught and different things and being able to read that on the baby, it all makes so much sense. I've been a midwife for years and didn't think too much about it. You just assume that the breech would fall out and you don't touch the breech baby. And then when I did my first Breech Without Borders course, I was just like absolute light bulb moment. Like, of course, like this, that makes sense of what the body is doing and just having a really thorough understanding.
That's right. And the crunch issue there is the understanding of the very normal breech, understanding that in detail, being able to watch it. See, my most important learning over the past 40 years is just watching women birth normally and just thinking very carefully and articulating as well that, how the baby is doing it normally. And so most of the time I'm not doing anything. I'm just thinking to myself, this is what the baby's doing, and thinking, gee, that's very clever. You appreciate that. And then that gives the opportunity, if something's not going right, clearly it gives you a better idea of how you might be able to work with the woman to get the baby out safely.
Yeah, that's the concept of midwifery, is understanding normal and watching watching like on repeat.
Yeah.
So then when it's not normal, you know that it's not and you know what to look for.
That's exactly right.
My experience in training as a midwife and a student, breech wasn't treated as normal. It was just this little snippet and then like refer. But working now in a home setting, you don't have that. If you've got a surprise, I've had 2 surprise breaches in my practice now. You have to know what to do.
That's right, yeah. And it's, well and truly within the scope of all midwives that once a baby's backside is birthed, you should be able to, it's in your scope to help that baby birth, whatever. Just like with a Capellic presentation, it's in the scope of midwifery practice to deal with the shoulder difficulty.
Yeah. Beautiful. One more question. Now that you've resigned, what's your plan moving forward? What are your goals now?
Well, I want to keep teaching, and I feel a strong responsibility that because, I do have a fairly substantial experience over the past years, I don't want those particular learnings to disappear into thin air. I want to be part of teaching initiatives so that the things that I've learnt, the things that I've found very valuable, that I pass those on to people. So that's very important to me, and I want to keep doing that. How long I keep doing it, I haven't decided, but for the time being, I want to do that. And so for the past 2 weeks, I've been in Lismore because they're trying to set up the whole possibility of offering breeches, and they're very serious about it. So I went up there, and every day I talked about breeches with them, and that was great. And mainly because I think I learned a few things as well. And so yesterday we did one of our breech courses, the Birthing a Breech Education, the BABE course. So it's that type of thing. I'll also be involved in various research initiatives around this and other things.
Australian specific research or?
Mostly Australian specific, but I wanted to be involved in some international initiatives as well.
That's fantastic. We need that. And are you teaching or working with Breech Without Borders as well, or are you just teaching the BABE course?
I have talked with Breech Without Borders, and if any opportunity arises there, I'd like to participate in that as well.
Fabulous. That's all the questions I have. Is there anything, last words of wisdom or information that you want to share with women listening that might have a breech baby on board?
Well, I just think that it's interesting. Since finishing, it was actually difficult to leave the birthing world, and particularly a lot of the sort of breech initiatives, and I thought it was all going to possibly disappear. But I think there are enough places around now who are showing an interest in this, and there's something about the birthing culture which I think will bring them more back into, to a certain extent, into mainstream practice. Right now, there's still a bit of a way to go, but it's interesting. I see more of a possibility for that now. And I think one of the very valuable things are the various teaching initiatives, be it Breech Without Borders, be it BABE course. But these are being taken on wholeheartedly, and particularly several institutions now are saying, what can we do to make this a possibility? So all of that's really good. And I think it's, people facing up. I think partly because of all the discussions around autonomy, etc. Well, I think the whole business of this subtly accepted coercion around breech birth is no longer going to be acceptable.
Just birth in general, but yes, absolutely with that as well. Yeah.
But the other thing is that I think various people have done these courses who might have been a bit concerned about breech birth. It's interesting watching them actually enjoy it, because it's almost as though they're, sort of learning something in a fresh way about, normal birth. And so I think all of that's a good thing. And I would hope the birthing women out there, don't feel too stranded and isolated when it's found that they have a breech baby on board, and that their options think will increase in a sort of very constructive way.
I hope so. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it so much.
Great pleasure. Always happy to talk about these. And I was particularly happy because, I've been thinking about these things in a concentrated way in the last 2 weeks. The podcast came at
perfect timing.
Sort of opportune time. Yeah,
great.
Perfect time.
Thank you. The Breech Birth podcast is independently created and produced. If you'd like to support the continuation of this space, you can do so through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support helps keep these stories being shared and accessible to women and families around the world, and you can find the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the Breech Birth podcast. These stories matter. They stretch what we think we know and bring voice to experiences that need to be heard. I'm so grateful to our guests who have shared their experiences with us, raw, real, and full of wisdom. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe and share with others. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Breech Birth Podcast. And if you have a breech story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, may we continue to reclaim the narrative, one story at a time.